Hollow Knight has remained my favorite game of all time for quite a while, so to say I was excited for Silksong is quite the understatement. After completely forgetting all responsibilities for the past week, after 50 hours I have achieved 100% completion on Hollow Knight Silksong, and I'm going to try to answer the big question: was this really worth the wait? Now I'll just come right out and say it. I absolutely love Hollow Knight Silksong, and I think if you're somebody who loved the original game, this is right up there for you. And at a $20 price point, this is just a complete no-brainer. But there has been a lot of discussion in the past week about the things like the difficulty, the rewards for exploration, the actual currency in the game, and I am really wanting to get into this and see what the original Hollow Knight did better and vice versa. So let's get into one of my favorite parts of Hollow Knight in general, the combat. Combat in Silksong is handled in a completely different way than I expected. The original Hollow Knight had you doing basic slashes until you had about 3 nail arts and 3 special moves that you could utilize in combat. But Hornet immediately feels different, not only in the directional pogo at the very beginning, but you later see she actually has tools to utilize and throw at people and set traps. You have 2 different currencies between the rosaries and the shards to actually craft these tools. Some of them are throwing knives, bombs, and spikes that you can lay on the ground. You also have 6 different abilities to utilize in combat, and Hornet also has a much bigger arsenal than the Knight does. But what I did not even remotely expect was the crest system in Silksong. This one definitely threw me for a loop when I first saw it. You start out with the original Hunter's Crest, which plays exactly how you think it would, besides that, 45-degree pogo again at the beginning. But there are 7 different crests that you can change at any bench that will completely alter your play style. This changes your regular attack, your charge attack, your pogo, and even sometimes gives you a buff after healing. Or one of them has you able to utilize more tools or special abilities. I found this to be exceptionally more expressive in the combat system to really add variety to different builds, as the crest kind of acted as these classes in Silksong. But once I found the Reaper class, that was an absolute steal for me, yet slightly heavier attacks with just the perfect downward pogo attack for me, and when hitting enemies it actually gained extra silk. I tried every class in the game and the Reaper was by far my absolute favorite, but there is a lot of player expression in here. I imagine the favorites are going to be all over the place. I absolutely love the combat system in both games, but Silksong allowed for, again, a lot more player expression, which I really appreciated and just absolutely love. Now I feel like I really can't even complete talking about the combat system without mentioning the movement upgrades in Silksong, because yes, this did have a huge part to play in the platforming section, of course, but it is just as important in the combat. For example, once Hornet gets her ability to run, it's game over. The running and launching from it added so much to my combat arsenal. This allowed me to have an extremely aggressive play style, which is, kind of my usual go-to. I just never felt held back by anything in combat. Silksong is much more demanding in this overall, so I feel the need for the additional movement was completely justified. I will get into the difficulty portion a little bit later, but almost every main boss does deal 2 masks of damage in this game, compared to the first where, only like the late bosses did that. So you need to be at your best and utilize everything the game has to offer, or you will likely fail. I absolutely loved the combat in this game overall. I moved significantly faster, and I feel they did a really good job not making the Knight and Hornet feel exactly the same. They're different people and they play completely differently, but how can we even talk about the combat without mentioning one of Hollow Knight's most beloved aspects, the bosses? I absolutely adore the bosses in Hollow Knight Silksong. I think there's an incredibly high bar, and they absolutely delivered here. There are easily around 4 to 6 bosses off the top of my head that I think are complete all-timers and some of the best the entire Hollow Knight franchise has to offer. The ones that immediately come to mind are Phantom, The Last Judge, Lace, all versions of them, and then Cogwork Dancers. My god, the First Sinner. There are a lot of really good bosses in Act 3 as well, but yeah, these just shined like you would not believe. For example, no extra enemies spawn in while I am trying to fight them. I'm looking at you, Grohl. But again, More on that later. But just all of these had excellent story beats, fantastic music drowning out the fight, well-timed and choreographed attacks that were definitely readable. Every time I died to one of these bosses, I knew it was 100% my fault. I had to learn the patterns and eventually overcome. Every time it just felt so freaking good. The final boss in Silksong was a little easier than I had hoped, but in reality, she is very comparable to the actual Hollow Knight boss in the original game, who was also pretty easy, and the true and final boss of Silksong provided a much greater challenge, which I really enjoyed. I think I fought every single boss this game has to offer, unless there are any like secret ones that maybe come out later, and I just think they honed their craft here and delivered some superb bosses. I am itching for a DLC similar to the God Home DLC because God, I want to refight some of these so freaking badly. I want hard modes, I want no-hit modes, I am desperate for it. Just like the original, not every single one was completely mind-blowing. There were absolutely a few misses here and there, but overall, I thought they were really special. Next, I really want to take a look at the overall map itself, because there are a lot more areas to go to here than the base Hollow Knight. So let's take a look at Pharloom VS Hallownest. I think the world of Pharloom is insanely interesting, with tons of places to explore and a lot of secrets to find. Now, truth be told, this is a lot larger than the original game, but for some reason, it felt slightly more linear than Hallownest did. I'm not sure if that's just because I'm a lot more familiar with this type of game, and of course, just the Hollow Knight brand in general, but I just never once felt like I was super lost like I did in the original game. I'm not really saying that it's like a bad thing per se, just kind of something to mention. I also found a few places really cool, like the area Bellheart. The first time I heard the area, sat down and heard that OST, I just sat there for minutes taking it in. And the Citadel also as well, super massive, and it's got its own freaking fast travel system, which I thought was amazing. But then we have places like Biowater. My God. In reality, I didn't really find it as difficult as others did. I did see a lot of discourse online about the bench placements in the game and frustrating runbacks. Gonna be real, I think the only one that's got validity is Biowater, and it only builds frustration because when you get poisoned in the water, you have to actually waste a heal just to get rid of it. It provides 0 extra heals, only to get to Grohl to fight waves of enemies with traps, then to fight the boss, which also spawns extra enemies. Yeah, I get the frustration, but other than that, I really felt like a ton of people online were whining over kind of more minor things. Most of the runbacks were not as bad, and a lot of bosses had benches that were very close by. Never really got tired of exploring this world. I love the character interactions and the moment-to-moment gameplay. I just think Pharloom is just as interesting as Hallownest with its own charm. But now I've talked about it a little bit here and there, let's address the big elephant in the room, the difficulty. I hate this boss with every fiber of my being. There's been a non-stop conversation on this game's difficulty since this one released, and I feel I may have the most controversial opinion on this topic. The game's difficulty is it's perfectly fine. The biggest complaint by far is how all the bosses and a lot of the enemies and contact damage deal 2 masks of damage. Everyone kind of unanimously agrees that the contact damage specifically from smaller enemies should not take 2 masks of damage, and to some degree, I do not disagree whatsoever. There were a lot more gauntlets here, and some right before bosses, and even enemies that spawn during those bosses, so I do think this is somewhat of a fair critique. But at the same time, you heal for 3 masks of damage with a click of a button. You can do this mid-air while running and use your momentum, and I genuinely feel the window of opportunity for healing is far greater here than it ever was in the original Hollow Knight. Same thing with the complaints of the runbacks. I feel people are forgetting how bad some of those were in the original. I will only give you the Biowater, as I think that is a perfectly fair critique. It is way too long of a run back. This is obviously going to vary from person to person, but I just really never struggled that badly. I had some challenges, absolutely, but rarely did it feel unfair to me. While I think the get good crowd can absolutely be a bit annoying, there is some slight validity to what they are saying. Sometimes you just have to get better, utilize everything at your disposal. I feel like some people were treating this kind of like a Soulsborne game where they were too ashamed to use their tools that they were given. I found them to be insanely helpful in the gauntlet, specifically in places with multiple enemies. I definitely think there is valid criticism to things that can be adjusted, but I never once felt anything was really unfair. Again, except for that dang second fight with the vengeful Beastfly, that guy can screw off. Now, a couple of quick things to touch on was like the music was awesome. Christopher Larkin Production has done outstanding work once again. Boss themes to location scores, everything was amazing. Absolutely bravo. The Secret Act 3 was fantastic as well, almost adding like 15 bosses and a lot of side quests and just tons of things to be sought out. The final boss here was also great, the multiple different endings. So much about this game I absolutely love. But I'm gonna go ahead and dip into some of the minor things that I'm really not crazy about. In my opinion, I only have two real gripes about this whole package. The first one is I think I just prefer the charm system in the original Hollow Knight more. I feel there were a lot more ways to combo them together and they just really had overall more powerful abilities. Now, I am assuming this was to balance out the additional abilities that Hornet gets, like the tools and the crest. It is genuinely a very small gripe, but it's just kind of something I thought I'd mention. But to me, the absolute biggest issue that stood out to me was the Gauntlet arenas. There are far too many of them. So many areas I just went to and I wished it was a regular boss or you know, God forbid there's a gauntlet before a boss that you have to fight every single time. There's a specific boss in Act 3 that has you fight, I think it's almost like 4 gauntlets before getting to the actual boss. It just started to feel it getting a little excessive kind of towards the middle of the game. It didn't ruin my enjoyment or anything like that. I still like the overall combat system and you know, that really never got old to me, but it was easily the thing that stood out to me the most, and I wish it had been tweaked just a little bit. But at the end of the day, I think Hollow Knight Silksong is an absolute triumph of a Metroidvania and a true proper sequel. In a world where $70 and $80 video games are being thrown at us left and right, this retails for $20 for about 50 to 60 hours of top-notch content. I need some of these big guys to take notes because Team Cherry is just operating on a level these guys could probably never match. Hollow Knight Silksong is an absolute must-buy and a modern-day masterpiece that was easily worth the 7-year wait.